Welcome to ClearPath Retirement Planning Podcast. I'm Kathy, and today we're going to do something a little different. This episode is going to be a pure listener Q&A. Joining me are Stewart and Mitch, the advisors behind ClearPath. Guys, thanks for being here.
Hey, everybody. Glad to be here.
Yeah, welcome back. We're excited for this one.
Okay, so we've pulled together some questions we hear most often from people who are either closing in on retirement or who are already retired and still trying to figure it all out. So let's get into it. All right, question number one. At what point should someone really start getting serious about retirement planning? Is there a magic number of years out?
So ideally, what we like to see here is for people that are kind of in that 10-year window. 10 years is ideal. It gives us lots of time to really go through the planning process and I would say that this mental change from this kind of mentality of, grow my assets, pure growth mode, to now I'm not putting money in anymore and I'm starting to spend that money is a very difficult transition to make. So the sooner you start to talk about this stuff, the sooner you start to really plan out this transition, the better. Doesn't mean that there's ever a you missed it kind of window, but 10 years is great. And I would say that, it's never too late.
Okay, next question. So everyone wants to know this question. How much money do I actually need to retire?
That's
Who's answering that one?
I'll give it a shot. Kathy, that's a great question. And there's a couple rules of thumb that have been tossed around the industry for a long time, but things are just more complicated than ever right now. What people generally hear is there's a withdrawal rule from your, all your assets that you built up. It's either 3 or 4%, depending on what you've heard, right? But it's much more complicated than that. There's so many factors that, again, I always say are introduced when you retire that weren't really around when you're in the accumulation years. Things like Social Security, things like Medicare, things like RMDs, where you have to take money out and pay taxes on pre-tax money. There's so many factors that are introduced for the first time, and it really, really gets complicated. So, and the other big factor is you have to think about expenses. You'll see online, you need to have $2 million, you need to have $1 million, you need to have whatever figure to retire. But it's so relative to what you spend. You could have a couple who spends $2,000 a month and lives off their Social Security and doesn't really want to travel much. Or you could have people who want to spend $10,000 to $15,000 a month and want to take 4 or 5 trips every year. So it's so relative to your goals. It's so relative to what income sources you have. It's so relative to, do you have a pension? Do you have a large Social Security? Are you going to receive an inheritance? There's so many factors. And this is probably the most common question Stewart and I see in the office is, do I have enough, right? Do I have enough saved? Will I have enough saved? And, we can sit there and model through that. We can sit there and say, okay, here's your income. Here's what income sources you have. Here's where the assets are at now. What can we do to reach the number that we want to get to? And then once we get to whatever number that is, how do we maximize that? How can we be the most tax efficient? How can we stretch that out through retirement and live that full, richer retirement?
Yeah. I think if you're going to talk about rules of thumb here, I don't like any of them, but my favorite, if we were going to have to pick, would be this 25 times your annual spending need. I think that's probably going to give you at least some sort of rule of thumb here. And let's say, you're living off of Social Security and a pension, or you're living off Social Security and you need to access $25,000 of after-tax money every year on top of whatever income sources you have, whether it be Social Security or pensions. And, if you look at that, 25,000 times 25 years would be in that neighborhood of about 625,000. So, you've got to also put that into perspective. That's after tax money. So, in order to have 25,000 a year after tax, you'd actually need quite a bit more than 625 if it's in pre-tax accounts like IRAs, because you're going to have to share that with the government. But yeah, I think that's a decent rule of thumb there to say if your spending need in addition to your income sources was another 25,000 that you needed to access from investments, that would need to be about 625,000 if it was 25,000 a year.
Okay, well, the next question. What's the biggest mistake you see people make in the years leading up to retirement? Who wants that one?
Go ahead.
Mitch wants me to take
Start it off. Yeah.
Fun. All right. So, here's some things that I think are the biggest mistakes is, first of all, underestimating healthcare costs. We see that quite a bit.
Yeah.
If you are going to retire prior to reaching Medicare age, and you're going to have to buy health insurance out on the open market prior, to bridge that gap between retirement and age 65 when you qualify for Medicare, that gets expensive. And that is a very difficult thing to nail down because everybody's healthcare needs are drastically different during that time frame. So underestimating healthcare costs prior to age 65, not understanding taxes and modeling the taxes and how those are going to impact you in retirement, because tax planning in retirement is very different than tax planning during your working years. So not understanding and really having your arms around what taxes are going to do to you and what that's going to, entail. And then, I would say not increasing your income every year to keep up with the rising cost of everything around you. And that would be inflation. And that's, we see that quite a bit. We had someone come in recently and he was an engineer and he was quite proud of his spreadsheet that he had put together. And I commend you for doing that. But, in his calculations, he'd done a phenomenal job, except for he hadn't even figured inflation into the picture at all whatsoever. And, when I brought that up, it was a light bulb went off and he had to go back and revamp his spreadsheet. And when he did, he was shocked at what that looked like. So those are a couple of the things that we see. Also structuring how you go into retirement, how your investments are positioned going into retirement, and, not having enough, either being too conservative or being too aggressive, not being allocated correctly, or understanding, the impact of taking significant losses in those first couple of years and how that can really, really hurt you in the long run. Those are all mistakes that we see people commonly make, but there's quite a few more.
There is. One thing I'd throw in there is, talking about Social Security and using it. I always like to say Social Security is an asset, right? It's an asset just like anything else that you've built into for the last 30, 40 years. So use it like one. Let's look at it. Let's run different scenarios. Let's say, hey, what if we're retiring in our early 60s, what if we take it right away? How does that impact us 20 years down the road, not just in the first year, right? If we delay it and live off of some pre-tax money, or maybe we've got some after-tax money saved up in CDs or in the bank, let's see how that looks. So using it as an asset and actually modeling through different scenarios with Social Security, a lot of people just hear rule of thumb. They just, again, we hate rules of thumb, but they'll see online that, oh, this guy on YouTube said you need to take it at 68 because that's the perfect number, right? Avoid doing that. Let's actually model through it.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, next question. So what should people be reviewing when they're taking into consideration a real retirement readiness checklist?
Yeah, I can start this one off. I know there's a ton of things we could throw out here, but I'd always say the first thing to start with seriously is getting a real grip on your expenses. This is the thing we'll sit here and talk to hundreds and hundreds of people a year, and almost none of them truly know what they spend. And it's the thing nobody wants to do. Everybody wants to look in their investment accounts. Everybody wants to look at stocks. Everyone wants to dump more money into their 401ks, but nobody wants to make a budget. Right? Nobody wants to make a budget. It's not fun. It forces you to really sit down and have tough conversations, and it's just not what you want to do. So the first step, again, it doesn't have to be down to the dollar, but within a couple $100, understand what you're spending every month. And people always are kind of hesitant to say, and it's like, look, we don't care again if you spend $2,000 or $20,000 a month. It's like, we just need to know. We're trying to build out an income plan. And you need to understand how it compares today to what you're going to want to spend in retirement. A lot of people think it's going to drop a lot. Most people probably doesn't. It actually goes up, right? So understand how much you're spending now and what does that look like in retirement? Is there going to be more? Is there going to be less? Is it going to be the same? Because a lot of people don't have clarity on that. And that's, I think, the biggest thing that I've noticed.
Yeah. This is a judgment-free zone.
Yeah.
We don't, we're totally non-biased here. We're totally judgment-free. And we are fiduciaries. Everything is held in confidentiality when we discuss these things. And so when we hit people with the real hard questions about the budget, two of the things that I see that get left off the budget constantly because nobody wants to really acknowledge it is the Amazon boxes that are showing up at the front door every other day. That is a big one. That is, listen, it's convenient. I get it. We do it.
Yeah, we do the same thing.
We do a lot.
Yeah.
To keep our business afloat and running and smoothly. But you got to be real. It's real money, and you're spending it, and we got to be real about those things. And the other thing I see is eating out. I mean, eating out is it's incredibly costly nowadays. And we have this conversation a lot in my household as to whether it's worth it or not. Because, I mean, the service has gotten worse. The food has gotten way more expensive. And the wait times and the frustration and all of those things just, you got to be real about that stuff too. I mean, if you're, we've seen instances where people are spending, $1,000, $1,200 a month eating out without even really understanding where that money's going. And so be real about these things when you go to do your budget. Be real about, what taxes and homeowners insurance and all of these things are costing you. But getting your arms around those expenses, and as you get closer to retirement, being able to start to trim the fat and start to try and whittle those expenses down as much as you possibly can to try, in retirement, it's all about expenses. Yeah. You ask how much money you need to retire. Well, I'll ask you, what are your expenses? I mean, that's what you need. But so understanding your expenses, starting to determine and figure out what the optimal time to take Social Security is, because that is a big decision that you can't turn back the clock on and you can't undo once it's done. Understanding, exactly what assets you have, exactly where they're located, how they're invested, how much risk you're taking, starting to really get your arms around those things. And then, really starting to model through different, scenarios as far as, healthcare events that could happen, as far as, all of a sudden somebody needs skilled nursing care and it's extremely expensive, or, the market makes a major correction and now, we've got a lot less money than we thought we had. I mean, all of those things we've got to kind of model through and understand. And, that would be the checklist I would start with is expenses, understanding Social Security timing, understanding your assets and what you have and how much risk you're taking will be a great place to start.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's move to another question. I will tell you, on our YouTube channel videos for ClearPath Retirement Planning and on our podcast on ClearPath Retirement Planning Radio on Apple and Spotify. One of the most popular topics, let's talk about that, Social Security. So that is one of our most viewed videos. So people are really interested in, when should I take Social Security? Who wants to answer that one first?
You can start us off.
Okay.
That's a good one.
I'll bite the bullet and take this one. So, Social Security is complicated. Social Security has a lot of factors that come into play when you're trying to make this decision. It is a very important decision. And like we just said, you can't undo this decision. Technically, you can in the first year. If you're within 12 months of making your initial election, you can. But even that's complicated. You got to pay it all back and start over. And that's tough for a lot of people to do once they've received that money. So, what I would say is a couple of basic rules of thumb here. The earliest you can take it is 62. Unless it's a survivor benefit and you've lost a spouse to death, you can start at age 60. But for most of Americans, it's 62. And understand that if you go at 62, you're taking a reduced benefit of about 25% less than what you could get at full retirement age. And for most folks, that's around 67 nowadays. So if you go at 62, you're locked in at a 25% reduced benefit for the rest of your life. You're leaving 25% of that asset on the table as far as an income stream for the rest of your life. And also, you have to understand that if you are making that decision as the higher earner in the household, that you are also making that decision to take that reduced benefit for you and your spouse's lives. Because if two people are on Social Security and one of them passes away, the survivor gets the higher of the two. So if you are the higher of the two and you've locked in at 62 and taken that reduced benefit, then you have reduced that benefit in effect for you and your spouse. If you wait after that, it's going to be an increase of anywhere from about 6.5% to 8% per year through age 70. You have to claim it at age 70 if you haven't claimed it. There is no benefit to you whatsoever in waiting beyond that point. So at age 70 is the latest you can claim it. And that is where you max that benefit out. Now, the things that come into play here that you need to be thinking about are, not necessarily some break-even analysis of, getting smaller checks for a longer period of time or bigger checks for a shorter period of time. And that's you can do that, and that's great to do. But, things that you need to be thinking about are things like, your health. If you are in poor health and you've got a poor health history, and the chances of you making it to full life expectancy are reduced because of that, then, odds are you should take it as soon as you can, right? I mean, that's just common sense. So you have to be real about your health. You have to be honest with yourself about your health. A lot of people don't want to do that. And so if health is a factor and you've been battling, you've had cancer, you've had, major heart condition, you've had all these things that can really impact your life expectancy, then you should take it sooner rather than later. For those people who have longevity in their families and who are living, into their 90s, you probably do better to go ahead and lean on assets from whatever age you retire. Let's say you retire at 65. You probably would do better if you have the assets in place to go ahead and spend those assets between 65 and 70 and lock in at the highest payment that you can, because, your the money that you have invested, isn't guaranteed to go up 8% a year plus cost of living adjustments. And that Social Security typically does that. And it has a history, a 10-year history of going up over 3% a year just in cost of living adjustments on top of, the 8% a year that you get between, full retirement age and age 70. So all of these factors are things to think about. We can certainly help you with that. We can help you, guide you through this process, and we can run actual models and get really dialed in, because when we understand the big picture of all your assets that you have, all of your income sources, exactly what your expenses are, and we, take into consideration inflation and what, the cost of living adjustments that have happened in Social Security, we can really start to dial that in and get really clear on what the most optimal strategy for you to declare and get your Social Security is.
Okay. Thank you, Stewart. So my next question is Medicare. When do I sign up and what does it actually cover?
Medicare, a fun one. I can kick this one off, Stewart. So we've been doing a lot of Medicare recently, and it's a very misunderstood area. Again, like we have been saying the whole episode, things just tend to get more complicated as you get into retirement. I don't know why. Things should be getting simpler, and that's what we try to do here at ClearPath, is make things simpler, and that's what we're going to try to do today. So Medicare, again, very confusing. What the main thing you got to understand is it boils down to two parts. There's Part A and Part B. I like to say one of them you have a decision on based on if you're going to have coverage or not, and one of them you really don't. So Part A, there's no reason to wait to sign up. You actually really need to sign up at 65. You're going to be penalized. You don't have to pay a premium for Part A. You paid into this unless you don't have enough work history, but threshold pretty low. So assuming you have enough work history, you don't pay a premium for Part A. You should go ahead and sign up for this immediately when you turn 65. Now you've got a 7-month window. We'll cover that in a second. But Part A, you want to go ahead and sign up for. Part B is where you're going to pay a premium. Now this is going to be based on your income from 2 years ago. So there's a 2-year rolling look back every year. So this is 2026. They're going to look at your 2024 modified adjusted gross income, and they're going to use that to determine how much your premium you're going to pay in 2026. And then next year, they'll look back at 2025 and so on. So this, you can wait as long as you have credible coverage. So if you're retired and you're just paying a marketplace plan, it's probably going to make sense to go ahead and get on Part B and get a Medicare, either a supplement or an advantage, and go ahead and get on that. But if you or your spouse are still working and you have employer coverage, it might make sense to delay it. So whenever we have a client that's getting ready to turn 65, we like to bring them in. We like to say, hey, bring in your workplace plan, right? Let's look at it. Let's look at what you're paying, what your spouse is paying to keep you on the plan, whatever the situation is, and let's compare it to the two phases of Medicare. Let's compare it to the Part B premium that you're going to have to pay, and let's compare it to whatever Medicare route we want to go. I like to say there's two kind of decisions. There's the supplement route, which is you're going to pay a premium every month, somewhere $100 to $200 a month, and that's going to cover all the extra bills. So any co-pays, any doctor's bills, labs, x-rays, all that stuff. And then there's the advantage route, which is going to be, you're not going to pay a premium. You're not going to pay any extra premium on top of the Part B, but you're going to pay little co-pays along the way. You're going to pay $40 for a specialist, $20 for the primary care. You're going to pay $80 for an x-ray. So you're going to kind of pay extra bills along the way. So again, if you're on an employer plan, let's review it, right? When you're getting ready to turn 65, you might be able to save substantial amounts of money by switching to Medicare, or you might not. We might say, hey, that employer plan's awesome, especially if you've got like a state plan, like PBA or anything like that. So it's very important to review that when you get closer to 65, but that's the biggest thing people misunderstand is, I need to go ahead and get on Part B right away. If you're on your employer plan, don't sign up for Part B and pay the premium and be on the employer plan. We've seen that so many times. So there's a lot of misconceptions there, and we like to sit down. Anytime you get close to 65, you have a 7-month window, 3 months before you turn 65, the month you turn 65, and 3 months after. So come in, sit down with us with no cost. We'll be able to look at that for you and really run a good analysis on that.
One of the biggest things we see people really mess up.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, Mitch. So the next question I have is, should I pay off my mortgage before I retire?
Boy, this is a loaded question too. So this has a lot of variables involved and a lot of factors involved in making this decision. And I would start with kind of, first of all, what kind of interest rate do you have on your mortgage? What kind of payment are we looking at? And, what, as far as your income in retirement goes, can you comfortably make that payment with the income that you have? All of those things are factors in it. It's interesting because interest rates were so low for so long that most people were in that 2 to 3% range on a mortgage, which made that question change is most of the time it was not advantageous to go ahead and pay off that mortgage because you have such a low interest loan. We could keep the money invested that you would have paid off that mortgage and do better than the interest we were paying on the mortgage, and you got your mortgage deduction whenever you did your taxes. So, a lot of times that was a pretty fairly easy answer to that question. But what I was saying now is things have got more complicated with interest rates rising. We've got loans in that 6 to 7% range now, which dramatically changes the picture as far as, how much interest you're paying and all of those things towards that loan. And you've also now put yourself into a situation where you're not guaranteed to outperform that in the markets if you're a pretty conservative individual in your investments. Even if you're not, there's just no guarantee you're going to beat 6 or 7% a year net of taxes and everything else. So it's a little more complicated decision nowadays. I would say that that is, and there's also a psychological element to that. I can't tell you how many people who I've told them, well, look, we've done the analysis and it's really kind of 6 one way, half dozen the other. It's not a huge deal either way. And they say, well, I just would rather pay it off because I sleep better at night knowing I don't have a mortgage. And there is value in that. So all those things are things to consider. If you are locked in at a very low interest rate and the payment is easily made and you're still getting some sort of mortgage interest deduction on your taxes for it, I would say you probably just want to keep the mortgage and pay it off normally. And if you are in a much higher interest rate mortgage and, you are looking at very different circumstances and payments, you're struggling with it, maybe we make a different call.
Okay. Thanks, Stewart. So when I leave my job, what should I do with my 401k?
You shouldn't leave it there.
That segues perfectly to what I was going to say. You shouldn't leave it there. And that's a great starting point. So, and again, another huge misconception. A lot of people think, oh, I just did a rollover call yesterday. And I was on the phone with a woman and she said, but wait, I can't, she was 64 years old. And she said, wait, but if I roll it over to an IRA, I have to pay taxes, right? This is the big misconception. So if you're over the age of 59 and a half and you're still working there, you're able to roll over to an IRA. We call this a rollover, where it's gone from a 401k to an IRA. These are both pre-tax accounts. So it's not a taxable transaction. You're not taking the money out. If you take when you retire, you take your 401k and put it in your bank account, you're paying tax on all that. It's all pre-tax money. You never do that, right? So you can go ahead and roll that over to an IRA, which is, again, just a pre-tax account. And what that's going to do is 401ks are typically very limited. They're designed to help people who don't maybe understand or maybe know how these things work, to just give them really simple, easy options, which are great. If you're at your work 401k, you're probably in what we call a target date fund, which is kind of designed to help get safer as you get closer to retirement, which is awesome. And it's a very great concept. But they're typically very limited in nature, where you've got, if you look at your 401k plan today, you probably got anywhere from 10 to 20 options to choose from, different target dates, and then maybe a few S&P funds, which again are fine. And it's a great place to keep deferring money while you're working. But once you hit that magic 59 and a half, if you're still working, you can go ahead and roll that to an IRA. This is typically what we do. And if you're not 59 and a half and you've left employment, say you're in a new job, you've got an old 401k, you can also roll that over to an IRA. A lot of times we'll see people roll that into their new 401k, right? Which again, it's not bad. It's better than leaving it at the old place, but there's better options. Rolling into an IRA is just another form of account, but we can buy anything, right? You can buy any stock, any ETF, any bond. It's basically just an account that can buy anything in the market, but it's pre-tax. So it's a lot more comprehensive. You got a lot more flexibility than a 401k, and you're not going to be so limited.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would put it in this, I would frame it like this. So how much help and support did you get, choosing investments in that 401k while you were working? And now you've separated employment from that company. And, I want you to put that in perspective, like now how much help, you weren't getting good help while you worked there. Now you've separated employment. Do you think anybody, if the market starts to crash, do you think anybody's calling you from Fidelity or Empower or, whoever's managing that 401k and saying, hey, I think we need to reallocate you? It's not going to happen. The phone will not ring. You're out there in no man's land. 401ks are a great place to grow money. They are an awful place to, get income and distributions from in retirement. So, like Mitch said, IRA, get it to an IRA with an advisor who's actively managing that for you, who can, help you and guide you in the right choices that you're making. And, even if you're paying a slightly higher fee to that advisor for the guidance that they're giving you, your returns are going to be dramatically better because you're having it actively managed. That, you're still going to come out better having that money in an IRA where you have lots more choices, lots more, flexibility to invest in the things that you want to invest in. And yeah, so for that, we like to say I love to ask the question to people, like, have you abandoned any 401ks anywhere? And they say, what? Like abandoned? What are you trying to say? And I'm like, because that's honestly what you're doing when you do that. So definitely don't want to leave it behind. Bring that to an advisor or, self-manage if you feel like you're competent enough to do that. But yeah, it's that's a no-brainer.
And one thing I'll add there even is if you feel like, I can't tell you how many times we've sat with people and we find old 401ks that they've had for, 30, 40,000, they're sitting in some old job. They forget about them. Like, not only do you not get service, they're not going to chase you down and say, hey, did you forget about us? Like, they're just going to leave the money sitting there and just keep collecting a little fee. So if you feel like you might have an old 401k somewhere, come down and, sit down with us. We can actually find it. We've got a lot of software and services today that'll help us track down old 401ks. So if you feel like you might have an old one at a job you left 20 years ago, like, don't leave that to them. Don't let them sit there and manage that because they're not managing it. It's just sitting on their platform and they're collecting a fee. Come sit down with us. We'll help you find it.
Yep.
These are excellent points. Okay. So now if I've spent decades saving, how do I actually create a paycheck for myself in retirement?
Pick us off. That's a great one.
We get this.
Man,
this
that's
is
the one.
So interesting because this is kind of one of those where the rubber meets the road questions that people really do get confused about.
Yeah.
And, what I would say is, first of all, structuring your assets and your, investments in a way that makes sense. And again, we kind of, we have that proprietary method, the fiscal house that we use that I think makes perfect sense to people and really puts it in a perspective. But once you get the assets allocated and situated the way that you need to enter into retirement, what you want to do is it's very simple. It comes down to money management. What you want to do is you're going to have income. Whether that's, let's just say it's just Social Security and you're getting $2,000 a month Social Security. So that's going to replace the first $2,000 of your working income. So you've got that taken care of right off the bat. But let's say you were bringing home $6,000 a month working income, and you'd really like to keep that income at that level. So you're like, okay, I'm only getting $2,000 Social Security. Where's the other $4,000 a month come from? Well, what we do for clients is we will, keep that money in whatever investment, whatever asset that they're pulling that income off of it. Let's say it's an IRA. So let's say we're spending that IRA money to replace that $4,000 a month. What we're going to do is set up automatic deposit from your IRA directly into your bank account every single month, just like a paycheck. And we are going to go ahead and take taxes out of that. We're going to go ahead at whatever your tax rate is and whatever we feel like your effective tax rate is. We're going to go ahead and pull those taxes out before we deposit that into your bank account every month. And we're going to go ahead and send that money to the IRS every single month. And at the end of the year, we're going to issue you a 1099, not a W-2 like you get from your employer, but it's a 1099, very similar, showing the distributions that you took and how much taxes we've already paid to the IRS for that, so that you don't get hit with some crazy tax bill at the end of the year. We've already prepaid, most, if not all of those taxes. If we overpaid, you'll get a little money back. If we underpaid, you might owe just a little bit. But we try to nail that down pretty close to what we think it's going to be. And I think we're pretty good at that. But really, it comes down to that. So we're going to have a withdrawal order on your investment. So let's say we start with the IRA. We plan on spending that down to zero. And then the next thing we're going to do is, once that money's gone, hopefully we've had other accounts that we've been growing that entire time. Once that account's gone, we're going to switch it over to another account, your brokerage account or whatever account that might be. And we're going to start pulling that money and putting it in your bank account every month and taking out the appropriate, we will make sure that paycheck never stops. And the goal is to make sure that paycheck never stops for the rest of your life. And in addition to that, if you need money and let's say all of a sudden you need a new roof, all of a sudden the HVAC unit goes out and you need to access, chunks of money to cover those types of things, trips that you want to take, we will have that addressed separately. We will have that in accounts where we can go grab that money and do the same thing. If we need to pay taxes on it, we pay taxes then, and we get that money to you for your trips or your HVAC or your roof. But typically, that's where the rubber meets the road, and a lot of people get confused, and a lot of people make mistakes with this because they spend the money in the wrong order. We call that withdrawal order. They spend down all their bank account money first before they tap into the IRAs or whatever the case may be. And when we look at it, we can tell you that is not tax efficient. That is not the way that you want to do things. And we can give you real guidance on that. But yeah, that's how we do it.
Okay, thank you, Stewart. So this kind of leads right into the next question. What about longevity risk? Running out of money before you run out of time?
That's a great one. I mean, that's very important these days. We like to say people are living longer and having longer retirements right now. I mean, we're seeing a lot of 30-year retirements. An interesting stat here is that a healthy 65-year-old couple has a 50% chance that one of them lives to 90. And that kind of blew me away, but it's true. I mean, one of the two. And, that could be a 30-year retirement right there, right? So there's a couple of steps we like to take to kind of prevent against longevity risk. First, we always talk about sequence of returns, right? It's so critical for the first few years of retirement, not to take major hits. And again, we come back to that proprietary fiscal house where we've got a certain amount of your money protected, especially in the beginning, to live off of. Because the worst thing that can happen is what happened to people in 2007. They're getting ready to retire. They built up a good, solid pre-tax 401k, whatever it is, getting ready to retire. And just that next year, the first year, they lose 40% of their money. That can really hurt the longevity of the portfolio, right? Because you've got 40% less money to grow, to take income from, versus if we have a good bit of that protected and we do have a bad year in the first couple of years, we're not going down so much because it takes almost double. If you go down, it takes almost double that to get back up to where you were. So it's very important to protect yourself against, losing a lot very early on. And then, also just understanding the impact of understand the impact of the overall portfolio with different market conditions, right? Saying, okay, if I've got some protected, how can I make sure to have some that can grow? The other mistake we see is people being too conservative in retirement. If we're going to have a 30-year retirement, we have to have some access to growth. You can't step into retirement and put everything in CDs, right? Most people can't. You need to have some access to the higher upside tech play. You need to have access to higher upside stocks. And we talked about it last week. The market's done very well the last few years. And if you have all your money sitting in the bank and you're just trying to live off that because you're trying to be safe, you're not going to have any chance to really get those gains. So it's very important to have a well-balanced house, as we always talk about. And I think that's the biggest key for longevity, is having some access to safety and some access to high upside growth.
Yeah, definitely. And the other benefit of that is being able to take money from the safe, the safe foundation piece in bad markets, and in up markets you can take money from the roof and kind of have that take profits off the table, so to speak, and you're living off profits in those years. But what it really comes down to is having a plan, and the importance of strategic retirement income planning is just vital in these types of situations to ensure you don't run out of money. And that is something that we do every single day for people, is give them the confidence of knowing it can't happen. And, here's how much I can spend comfortably and know that that's never going to happen to me. And, one of the huge joys and thrills I get out of this business is giving people a real plan to make sure they can sleep at night and understand that won't happen with them.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think this has been an incredible show. I appreciate you guys answering all these wonderful questions. I need to go update my own retirement plan after this. But before we wrap, where can people find you and learn more about ClearPath Retirement?
Yeah, so come see us at ClearPathRetirement.com. You can find us on YouTube or on just do a search for ClearPath Retirement Planning. If you want to give us a call, it's 864-775-5033. We'd love to hear from you. We hope you enjoy these videos, and we hope you're learning a lot from them. And we just appreciate you joining us today. And we thank you to our host, Kathy.
Yeah, thanks. It's been a fun one, Kathy. We appreciate you.
Yeah. And until next week, everybody have a happy retirement.